Hello everyone, Mike Levin, Monday, May 9th, around 9:10 a.m. Walking to work here near Madison Square Garden. And I guess the thing I want to talk about today on the way in is why I am so falling in love with my programming, development, coding stack, execution environment, development environment, whatever you want to call it. There's been different names used for that sort of stuff over the years, but really what I'm talking about is Linux, Python, the Vim text editor, and the Git code repository distribution control system. So Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. And I haven't felt quite an affinity for any technology really since the Amiga days. Now the iPhone has come close with quite how much it raised the expectations of the population in general for how good technology could be. But I went through that process in 1987 and 88 and 89 and 90 on the Amiga computer platform, which really had more in common with today's modern computers 30 years later than it has dissimilar, which you can't really say about many other platforms. The Amiga had multitasking, it had photo quality, number of colors and resolution on screen, it had animation, it had video and various degrees of video editing that just were decades ahead of its time. And in some ways the PC industry is only just catching up, and the Mac as well. For example, the way the Mac finally handles full screens elegantly and intuitively to switch between multiple programs without having to deal with the utter ridiculous clutter of Windows. Yeah, Mac is really no better than Microsoft when it comes to a messy, unstructured windowing environment. And it was Microsoft that was leading the way to fixing that with ArrowSnap. It's not really a virtual screen environment, and Windows took longer than anyone else to get to true virtual screens, but you hardly need the virtual screens in Windows because of their, window snapping technology, which is pretty good. In my opinion, OS X only just recently caught up with elegant user interface-wise with their way that they handle full screen now. When you hit the little green expand arrow on things that properly support it, pop full screen. But anyway, that's really just a point of saying how long it took for the mainstream platforms to get down the tiny nuanced details that the Amiga had down so well so long ago. And so right now on Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, I'm falling in love with something which is not a hardware platform. It doesn't get its advantage and give you, by extension, advantage based on superior hardware the way the Amiga did, and I guess to some degree the way the iPhone did. Rather, it gives you something that is utterly and completely generic, almost invisible from a user interface standpoint. When you ask, what does Python look like? Python doesn't look like anything. It's the text editor of your choice, and a huge diversity of execution platforms. People might say, oh, Python is that thing you install from python.org that gets on your machine and lets you, run Python space filename.py. Well, that is one. In fact, that is the specification instance of Python, or the reference Python, or CPython they call it, the officially blessed Guido van Rossum version. And then there's a whole bunch of others. There's one called PiPi, which is PyPy, not to be mistaken with the other PiPi, which is the distribution system, the repository of software on the pip system. But rather, PiPi is an optimized version of Python for people who are not happy with the execution speed of the reference version. And then there's MicroPython in embedded systems. There's a version of Python running natively, nearly natively in the web browser. And then, you know, it goes on. Python is actually, as a truly free and open source programming language that doesn't actually have a corporate sponsor. There's no, you know, Red Hat or IBM or Oracle behind Python. It's just, you know, truly out there, free and open source. Despite that, it keeps getting more and more popular and getting more and more attention, making it worthy of being something that you can invest your heart and soul into, because it's not necessarily going to be yanked away through the whims of, you know, who buys what and corporate sponsorship, like the cycle that MySQL has gone through not long ago, continuing the cycle that Berkeley DB went before that, which basically artificially submerged or subdued the rise of the concept of NoSQL. It wasn't until things like Redis and MongoDB and CouchDB that the concept of NoSQL, a generic name value pair database, became popular again. But really, Berkeley DB was that a long, long time ago. And then there's a program in just default Unix, I think it might even be part of the POSIX standards, called DBM, which is name value pair NoSQL just built right into Unix. Not a very powerful one. Things like Berkeley DB that Oracle bought and Redis are attempts to extend exactly that environment to extremely large-scale enterprise-capable systems. So, my new love for software stack is mostly directed towards Python, I'll admit that. But you can't forget to mention Linux, with Linus Torvalds bringing this whole thing that got wrapped up in intellectual property challenges through SCO about who owned Unix. Against that backdrop, Linus goes, oh, here is a black box version of Unix called Linux, and the world gradually catches on and starts using it for web stuff. So the MySQL, Linux, Apache, MyPHP LAMP environment helps Linux become incredibly popular, because you can do really neat stuff for this emerging thing called the web with no money beyond the hardware. And that was a game changer. Legitimized Linux, whether the big guys liked it or not, no matter how much Microsoft wanted to call Linux a virus. This summer, Microsoft is including the Unix or the Ubuntu Bash shell in Windows 10, showing just how far standardization has come, because the only platform out there right now that is not standard underneath but is still massively popular is Windows, which creates all kinds of problems from a developer standpoint, with your paths getting messed up and your execution tool chains not being configured exactly right when you pull stuff from a repository into, say, Cygwin to try and simulate a legitimate Unix environment on Windows, which is what I'm doing at work, which has led to other projects such as Anaconda, which is meant to simplify that, but even that has its problems. If you want things to just go right, you use Linux. If you want a really nice user interface and things to mostly go right, you use OS X and a Macintosh. If you want constant grief and headaches, you use Windows. Right now at the office, I had to install an Ubuntu virtual machine on Oracle's VirtualBox just in order to be able to install software with all the correct dependency chains intact for it to install correctly and run correctly. Namely, everything I needed to connect to a Postgres-like database from Python. And let's see where I am. I gotta make sure I don't overshoot things here. I got one more street like this to go. Okay, so final thoughts, because I'm almost at the office. Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. Well, Vim and Git are deserving of their own video after I'm 11 minutes in. Suffice to say, Vim is an old school text editor where you'll only have to remember your keyboard shortcuts and macros one time for the rest of your life, and you'll have memory, muscle memory that serves you for the rest of your life in a very major way, because either Vim or its ancestor VI is installed on every single Unix and Linux-like machine out there. If it's not, it's usually just one command to get it installed without having to be a graphical desktop system. So you can work natively on headless servers, which are really the norm in the cloud. So if you want to be able to edit text files and be productive and even do development work directly on the most common types of servers that exist today, cloud instances, you need to be able to do it directly through the command line shell. And the editor that's always there is VI, and then the improved version that's often there is VIM, and it gives you a sort of text file kung fu that is, I believe, unmatched in the industry, except maybe for Emacs, whose kung fu is even better, but that'll be yet another video. And then Git. Nothing would really mean anything if it weren't out there and shared and in front of people's faces. So the same guy who did Linux in working, standing on yet still other people's shoulders, as he did with Linux, because he just did Linux, which was sort of a clone of Unix, and he did Git, which was, I believe, a clone of BitKeeper before that. One of those products, but basically it was proprietary. They wanted to start charging. They changed their licensing agreements. So Linus just used his file system development skills and applied them towards a distributed revision control system. And then the website GitHub jumped on that to give it a really nice user interface, because a lot of people had difficulty using Git directly through the command line. It's a little cryptic, but its significance is so profound that by GitHub giving it a nice UI, they connected some dots and they demonstrated to the world just how cool Git really is. And between those four pieces, Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, you've got a full-fledged development system with, repository systems to control whatever supplementary software or packages you really need to be productive, and to edit files, to execute those files once created, to create deployment systems, to script your large-scale deployments. And really, with just those four pieces, you have enough to sort of be with you for the rest of your life, and to very specifically dodge obsolescence, because so many technologies come and go. They're fashion and fad driven. Active server page might be an example of such. They come and go in waves. PHP had its time. Ruby on Rails and JavaScript are having their time. Now, JavaScript is different from many others, but again, that'll be another video, because it's the native language of the web browser and will never go away. It is fad converted to trend. But things like Ruby on Rails, you got to really think twice about. What does it have to offer truly that isn't offered 10 times better under Python. And sure, them's fighting words, but you know, spend some time on each. Try and tackle, you know, 5 projects over the course of the next 5 years, doing it Python and Ruby, and then come back and you know, evaluate my statement. It really is a love-worthy platform, and I guess that's where I'll wrap up this video. And thanks for listening to me ramble so long. If you actually made it to the end of this almost 16-minute video, thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.